आवाज आ रही है हमारी?
Professor, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
So all good. I'm not so indecent.
No. You're looking fabulous.
Okay.
So we will ping you in the sense
Yeah.
we'll 10.
Yeah.
10.
Sharp at 10 and then.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
So you're the thing, sir. I hope you've seen the schedule. After Professor Tamali makes her introductory remarks, she'll give a brief introduction of you and then ask you to say a few words. And then you can perhaps take 10 to 10 minutes if you can take your time, in fact. And then
No. I will be as short and brief as possible. Okay. And definitely, I do not have that much, ability to speak long. So you guys are, don't worry. Okay. I'll just thank you guys. I'll thank them. I'll ask the question like a kid, and I'll say over to Professor Kalyan. Okay? Or Professor Tamali.
Thank you, sir. Right.
Okay.
Okay.
So who do you want? Tamali or you? After my
anyone. Yeah, Professor Tamali will take over.
Directly you can tell him also, because after your speech is
yeah, I think you will be coordinating, moderating the whole.
Yes.
So I will over to you only.
So directly you can, yes. Then you will thank him.
Right. Okay. In which way?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. 10. Good morning, Professor Karthika. Morning, everyone. We will begin at 10, okay? In the meantime, if you want to take a quick break, you're welcome.
Good morning, professors. I'll just come back once the meeting starts.
Yeah, you're welcome. I've muted.
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, sir.
Hi, Sinita. Good morning.
Sir, that is.
Okay, we'll start.
Just check with the
Hello, is it audible?
Hello, yes, it is audible, sir.
Okay, Charan sir will join in a few minutes.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Good morning, all. We're starting in 2 minutes. We are waiting for one of the panelists.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
Good morning, sir.
Hi, good to see you.
Good to see you too, sir. We will begin in a couple of minutes, sir. We are waiting for Dr. Sharma.
Sure.
And then we'll begin.
Sure.
So let me say good morning to all of our faculty and students who are joining in panelist mode. Welcome. We'll begin in 2 minutes. Thank you for joining.
How's the weather in Visakhapatnam?
Visakhapatnam, it's rather pleasant, I would say, sir. It's not too hot, not too cold. It's just about right.
So I'm coming there tomorrow.
Oh, right. Oh, yes. For the Canara Bank.
Yes, so I don't need to carry clothes.
Maybe a light sweater, maybe.
Not
That
required.
not required. Then
This jacket is not needed.
no.
Perfect. Then I'll come with my sports shoes. Then I can walk on the beach.
Welcome, sir. Welcome. Yeah.
What is your reaction, Kalyan? You are not a part of the panel. So I can ask you, what is your view on the budget?
Well, when it was announced, I was quite hopeful. I felt it was the long-term priorities were kept in mind, sir. But when when the documents were tabled, my take is maybe the education and health sector didn't get. In fact, they didn't get anything at all. Major. So it's more infrastructure driven and future oriented in the sense of physical as well as maybe a few incentives for green infrastructure. That's all I thought about it. I mean that's my initial reading of it.
And who are the two people sitting next to you?
So let me introduce Professor Tamali, who is sitting to my.
This is Tamali. She is a tough professor. Okay, she didn't want to move my time even from a minute, and they had to move my other host, and I committed to them 2 months ahead.
Oh,
but that's okay.
Actually, sir, other panelists we have already said yes, and so it was tough at the last moment. Sir.
That's okay. So they, at the end of the day, all is well, it ends well, right? They agreed to move it, my speaking time, from 11:30 to 12:30.
Okay.
So it takes me 90 minutes from here to go there. That is in person. So Professor Tamali, what is your view on the budget?
Sir, actually, even similarly, even I was thinking the same views. Like we expected more on health sector because after the pandemic, we expected some more. And I was feeling that although we are talking about sustainable development and all, but for the environment, we did not look much. That was just my personal view. So.
And Kalyan, who's this other person?
To my right is Professor Asmita Verma. She's also in the economics and social sciences area.
Good morning, sir. Very nice to have you here with us today.
Thank you. What is your view on the budget?
Sir, I concur with my colleagues here. And
that is to be on the safe side, or that is the truth?
No, sir. No, not on the safe side. But yeah, it's my personal opinion that I generally sort of work more in the development sector, and I feel that as far as education and health are concerned, and especially for health, I felt that from a lot of time we've been saying that we'll increase the budget and we'll go ahead with universal health coverage and all. But I don't see that kind of a impetus in the budget. That saying, I feel that even for long-term development, they've taken some good initiatives, but social sector continues to be nil.
So they have dedicated one full chapter in economic survey on social sector for the first time, and you are still undermining them. This is unfair to Delhi.
However, one that Make in India movements to make it stronger, they have taken initiatives, lot of initiatives for entrepreneurship and all self-improve.
Yeah. See, the Vande Mataram Express, which is faster than the Shatabdis and Rajdhanis, is totally made in India.
Yes, sir.
So to that extent, something is starting to show results.
Yes, yes, yes.
I think your third panel, by the way, Professor Kalyan, I spoke to Professor Bhanu and requested him if he's willing to swap places. Because I will stay connected on my iPad, same iPad, while I'm traveling. I'll be able, I would not take on video, but audio questions I'll take whatever you want. I've told them that I'm available from 12:30, but that 90-minute I will cover where I'll not be able to use the video. I'll be in the car. So I've requested Professor Bhanu. I hope if you agree, then I'll like.
Yes, sir, definitely. Definitely. Sir, I think Professor Sharma, Dr. Sharma has already joined. Thank you. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, sir. So I think we can now start.
Yes.
Yes.
Professor Bhanumurthy ji, if hello.
Professor Bhanumurthy, sir, I think. Yes, sir.
Yes,
sir.
I'm here. Yeah.
We can start now.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Good morning, all. Thank you for being present for the panel discussion on decoding the union budget in the era of AMRIT KAAL. My name is Tamali Chakravarti, and I am assistant professor in economics India and at IIM Visakhapatnam. And on behalf of economics area colleagues, Professor Kalyan and Professor Asmita, and all my other colleagues of other management areas at IIM Visakhapatnam, welcome you all the panelists, all the dignitaries. I also welcome the students, the other faculty colleagues, and all other rest participants. I'm pleased to welcome three eminent speakers: Professor R Bhanumurthy sir, Dr. Charan Singh sir, and Dr. Manoranjan Sharma sir for our panel discussion today. Welcome you all, sir. Firstly, allow me to welcome Professor R Bhanumurthy sir, who is Vice Chancellor of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar School of Economics University, which is known as BASE University, situated at Bangalore. He is currently on leave from National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, which is called NIPFP, in New Delhi, where he was a professor since 2009. Previously, he has worked as an assistant professor and associate professor at Institute of Economic Growth, Delhi. His research areas are macro monetary economics, fiscal policy, international money and finance, macroeconomic modeling, and development economics. In these areas, he has authored over 80 research papers and 5 books. He had brief stints at UNESCAP, Bangkok, and at UNDP Regional Center at Colombo as a macroeconomist. He has been a consultant and visiting fellow at various places like the World Bank, UNDP, ILO, etc. As part of India's G20 presidency, Dr. Bhanumurthy is nominated as a chair for the T20 Task Force on Macroeconomic Trade and Livelihoods. He has received 2 prestigious awards: Mohanlal Nebis Memorial Medal National Award for the year 2014 and V.K. Rao Prize in Social Sciences Economics for the year 2015 for high quality research and for significant contribution to social science research in India. Welcome you, sir. It's our great pleasure. Now, I welcome our second panelist, Dr. Charan Singh, who is the Chief Executive of EGROW Foundation, Foundation for Economic Growth and Welfare. He has been the non-executive chairman of Punjab and Sindh Bank. He was full-time visiting faculty and former RBI chair professor at Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, where he taught comparative monetary policy and policy issues in Indian economy. Earlier, He was a senior economist at the Independent Evaluation Office of the International Monetary Fund from 2009 to 2012. And he was also a research director at RBI from 1997 to 2009. He was a visiting scholar at globally renowned universities like Harvard University and Stanford University. He is former director of the board of National Housing Bank, NABARD Financial Services, etc. Welcome you, sir. It's our great pleasure to have you here. Let me now welcome our third panelist, Dr. Manoranjan Sharma, who is the Chief Economist of Infomerics Ratings. He was earlier the Chief Economist, General Manager, and Chief Learning Officer of Canara Bank. With 6 books and 350 publications and presentations at 100 national and international conferences, he is globally acclaimed as an expert in the Indian economy, banking, MSMEs, rural credit, financial inclusion, sustainable development, etc. He was recognized as an expert by the UN Virtual University for Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. He has been nominated a member of over a dozen advisory councils in 7 states, including member Governors Advisory Council of Rajasthan. He received several awards. One I can mention here, IIF CSR Awards and I think IDSA CSR Awards for his contribution. His views have been repeatedly cited in the Associated Press of New York, Dow Jones of New York, International Herald Tribune, and Wall Street Journal of New York. Welcome you, sir, and it's our great pleasure to have you here. I thank now all the speakers for taking time on a weekend to address and interact with our faculty and the students on the very important topic of Union Budget, which is also the first budget in the AMRIT KAAL. Our Finance Minister, Nirmala Sitharamanji, stated that the vision for AMRIT KAAL includes knowledge-based and technology-driven economy, inclusive development and growth. And to achieve this vision, we require the public participation, or which she has mentioned as Jan Bhagidari, which is very crucial. Welcome you all, sir. Now, I will invite our coordinator of academics and research, Professor Shivshankar Singh Patel, kindly make his introductory remarks and share his thoughts on the importance of understanding the Union Budget. Professor Shivshankar is from the Decision Sciences area of IIM Visakhapatnam, and he heads the Interdisciplinary Decision Sciences and Analytics Lab, which we call as IDL Lab. One of the thrust areas of IDL Lab is computational public policy. Welcome you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Please give your notes.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much, Dr. Tamali. And I extend a warm welcome to Professor Charan Singh, Professor Bhanumurthy, Dr. Manoranjan Sharma. Why I'm saying that, because I had been once in a classroom of Professor Charan Singh, and you know, always there is a bliss to feel like a student. So though this is a ritualistic that I have to give an introductory remark, but I feel like a blissful student in this classroom where Professor Charan Singh and others are there. So so their authority. So I remember, I still remember, I think it was 2012, where he was speaking about this housing index. That time I think he was working, and he gave a very beautiful thing. He said, like, no, we have houses. It's just that the people, those who do not have houses, we have made that not affordable to them. And it just touched me at that time. That kind of, you know, nuances can be explained in a very beautiful way, that how the economy could be understood, those who are not from the economics background. So that's the background. I welcome you all, sir. It is a great pleasure, and it's blissful for us to see you here. A warm welcome that I extend on the behalf of our director, all the faculty, being as a coordinator ANR. Again, I'm not from the economic, but what I was trying to see from particularly, you know, one is the predictive aspect and one which is the objective aspect. So as a student, when I see this for a planning or budget or whatever you call it, AMRIT KAAL, what is the prediction about this Amrit Kaal? So, because I can definitely say that this budget is something which is going to be you can say a main stone on which the Amrit Kaal could be built. But what is where all the other variable that is going to give us what is going to happen in this Amrit Kaal? So the predictive part is something which I was not able to understand, that from where the prediction is coming, though the objective is clear. That's the critical aspect. One, the supportive argument is that, yes, there is a lot of focus is on the infrastructural development, which actually align with the objective that, no, we have to be a developed economy. Again, I'm asking as a question that if we see, the intuition says that the Western economy, particularly the North America and Europe, is shrinking. So for whom we are going to manufacture? Most likely that we are manufacturing and giving it to the internal, means the consumption which is there, the increasing population here. So do we have any prediction on that direction? And is it something that we are trying to allocate the budget or the policies which is helping the skill and also the ecosystem? So the mismatch, since I'm there in the higher education, and we have already seen, we are not happy the amount that has cut for the allocation to IIM. When I see that, there's again a question. What about the PhDs that is graduating? When we say that the manufacturing sector should go up, now the PhDs will not go and manufacture shoes. So what is that balance that the money that is going toward the research, innovation, moving there to the manufacturing? So all these questions are there. Maybe as a student, I will get the answer in this discussion, and many of, I can say that many would having similar type of question. Again, I can only pose question. I don't know. These are the things that came to my mind. It could be naive and stupid also. But now I request Professor Kalyan, again, my thanks to all the panelists, and thanks to Tamali. And yeah, over to you, Professor Kalyan.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you for your remarks. There's some of the points that you raised are very well questions on our mind as well. So without further ado, you shall indulge me for 2 minutes. I want to make a few comments before I formally invite our speakers. So good morning, everyone. Today I want to set the agenda for today's session. As you all may be aware, the Union Finance Minister had introduced the budget on 1st of February. This is widely being touted as the first budget of the Amrit Kaal. For the uninitiated here in the audience, Amrit Kaal is generally the term that's being given to the 25-year period before India celebrates its 100th year of independence. So the Prime Minister had set a goal for India to be self-sufficient in this period and meet all its humanitarian obligations towards its citizens, and in fact be a beacon of hope for all of humanity. India being a beacon of hope for all of humanity. In this context, the Finance Minister in this year's budget had laid out 7 principles that she said would help us navigate the future, beginning with 7 components, and I'll read them out. They are reaching the last mile, infrastructure as a basis for development, public investment spending, what she also referred to as unleashing the potential, that is pillar number 4, green growth, which is pillar number 5 or star number 5, and 6 being youth power, and 7 being the financial sector. And she broadly referred to these 7 principles as Saptarishi, which, if you follow the English constellations, this refers to the Big Dipper constellation, which has constantly been a guiding constellation for navigators in the night sky. And perhaps that's what she meant by saying that these 7 economic principles or priorities principles will help India navigate the future in terms of its economic development. With today's discussion, we hope to hear from our speakers whose stellar record as economists will help enlighten us and clear up our understanding of this year's budget. And hopefully it will set forth a roadmap for all of us present here, both students as well as teaching faculty and anyone in their respective professions, in terms of understanding what our role would be in contributing towards the Indian economy. So with that statement, I now welcome our first speaker, Professor Charan Singh ji, to please make his remarks. So I just want to say, sir, you could speak perhaps for half an hour or as much long as you want. And then towards the end of your speech, we'll take a few questions and then we'll invite Professor Bhanumurthy and we'll repeat with Dr. Manoranjan Sharma. So that's the format, sir. I welcome you and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. First of all, Professor Kalyan, I must congratulate you for doing this. At IIM Bangalore, I had started it on the same very day, and I'm happy that you are doing it 2 days later in the close proximity of the budget presentation. So important that an intellectual exercise is done, because otherwise we are bombarded by TV channels and newspapers. These are basically journalists, and they try to make a good sense out of it. But how much can they, because they're not trained as economists? So I'm really thankful to you for organizing this. It gives me a good feeling. I'm also thankful to you for inviting me to be a part of this. So that's a feeling. I must also say that I feel very much at home, because when you are with students and colleagues, you can say anything you want to say. Well, you are in safe zone. Nobody's going to misinterpret it. And you are a student yourself. Means I'm 62. I've gone across the world, as she read my bio. But I can tell you there is so much to learn every day. And the world is so vast. And every day, the more you learn, the more you realize that, oh my God, I'm so old and I didn't even know this petty thing. Right? So I feel very comfortable when we are with the students and faculty, because that gives me a feeling that I'm also going to learn. The third thing I want to be honest with you, and very, very honest with you, is that I'm seeking to speak first. It's a little greedy because I had another commitment, but the fact is there is so much to learn from Professor Bhanu and Manoranjan. They know more than me. So in a way, all my ignorance that will become apparent in the next 10-15 minutes, the both of them will be able to cover it up. And I'll also learn on my way while I'm traveling and commuting, and I'll be still connected with it. So with these three observations, I would like to share my thoughts on the budget. Look, and I feel so small in front of Professor Bhanu. He's a fiscal expert at National Institute. I find it so small to even say that, look, I know fiscal. But let me make an attempt and share some of my thoughts. So I feel, and I feel very good about the budget. The reason is that the budget is providing continuity. And that's what I've always said. How can you keep tweaking every now and then? And imagine that the investment, which is generally 7 to 10 years of gestation period, should flow in regularly when you will keep tweaking the fiscal policy every year. How will that happen? So this is the first time I find that continuity happening here. You can easily see the flow of things happening from 2014-15 till today. And if you are a visionary and if you are a policymaker, you can anticipate, okay, this is what will come now. So that is something I like. The other thing I like is the strength with which the FM, or call the PMO, or whosoever, the government has worked. Now let me bring this to your notice that in the midst of pandemic, everybody used to ridicule India. And I'm used to ridicule because if I have time, I'll share that with you, how the world used to ridicule us when derivatives were introduced and we did not. And how did the world ridicule us when the mortgage-backed securities and asset-backed securities were being used in America as modern financial instruments, innovated, right? And we did not and how even our governor, Dr. Y.V. Reddy, was ridiculed for not understanding what these sophisticated products are and depriving India of them. So I'm used to ridicule because I've been in the RBI. But in COVID, the ridicule was high. Look at America, 20% of the budget. Look at the way they're pouring money, they're sustaining the economy. And here, India, we stood our ground. We are a poor country, whatever said and done. And we have limited resources, whatever said and done. How were our resources used? Laser beamed. The food, we had a huge stock of food grains. And that huge stock of food grains was so intelligently used, laser beam, to help the poor. So much so that later on, Bhasin, Bhalla and Virmani came out with a study at the IMF working paper saying that they were able to sustain and not let people fall below the poverty line. The health part has yet not been captured, quantified. I'm trying to do that, but I'm finding it a challenge. Nevertheless, that attempt. Secondly, when it came to health, free vaccinations, innovation on the vaccination, resources provided to the people who can manufacture the pharmas and the vaccination produced, not only within the country, even exported. Health facilities opened even in private hospitals to the poor people. How will you quantify that? Nobody will quantify. The third thing, remember just about 2 years back, the Prime Minister came and said, look, don't lay off people. It's a difficult time. And people, many friends in the industry told me, and I was a member of the SHM at that time, heading their banking vertical. Many people told, because the Prime Minister has said, we are not laying them off, but some have accepted 50% salary cut because they didn't come to office. And some have even accepted 80% salary cut, but they're staying with us. And I have a friend in Bombay who told me in Bombay, there are people who have accepted 100% salary cut on the condition when we resume office, we'll be on priority to join. That is how India took care of its people. Unlike the Western world, where people just were laid off and the government had to intervene by providing unemployment allowance. Now, if you look at unemployment allowance, there was very large. But in India, we took care through a different strategy and we survived and we did so well. Why do I say we survived? Look at the consequences of that reckless fiscal policy that they adopted. Liquidity was in the system, massive. And when Ukraine-Russia war took place, it was like a trigger that happened, just a matchstick shown, inflation zoomed. Now, our India's 30-year average of inflation is around 6%. In America, is 2%. Our Russia-Ukraine war post-period, inflation touched 8%, 7%, 6%. The upper side of our inflation target, 4 + 2 - 2, is around 6. We are hovering around that. America's 30-year average is 2. Euro is less than 2. England is less than 2. And what was the inflation in those countries? 10%, 8.2, 9, 5 times more. Just to understand, imagine inflation in India is 30%. How would we react? Right? And look at those countries, because they had mismanaged their economy, all this was happening. Because we had not mismanaged our economy. And I tell you, the credit goes to the policymakers, credit goes to the government and the bureaucrats and academicians who are associated with the government, who guided the government. And I must also share one secret with you. I was in Delhi at that time, and I told a couple of friends that in the ministry, look, if a person is running 104 temperature, you have to give him 2 crocins. Then they came back to me that here is an answer from the right person. We will give 2 crocins. We will not give 1. We will not give 3. Appropriate dosage for the right tenure and duration. Unlike the Western world, which threw money ridiculing us. Now, this is not new. The Western world has done this for long. If you remember 2003, they started with the subprime, and then they started lending recklessly, and they called it as financial innovation. And 2008, Lehman Brothers happened. Again, reckless, unconventional monetary policy. Reckless, accommodating. So much so that the balance sheet of the central banks in those countries doubled. And then it went nearly 4 times. Unconventional monetary policy. They're not stopping it. In COVID, from 0 in 2008, or say 1 in 2008 to 4 in 2012, that is the global financial crisis, it was hovering there, and 2020 to 2022, it doubled. The balance sheet in USA, Euro, England, broadly. Not in India. Very careful, very careful. So what was the consequence? Our inflation continued to be under control. Our gross fiscal deficit, I'll come to the gross fiscal deficit a minute later. So the continuity that came with the new government, initially when they came in, they spoke about the Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act. They revisited it. And they said, we have to follow the targets. Then they had a glide path. Then we had the COVID. There's never a day of rest for them. But during COVID, as I gave you the example of crocin and 104 fever, very careful, very cautious, very, very adequate, appropriate laser beamed measures to save people and lives. But a glide path is there in the mind. We have to go for fiscal consolidation. In the midst, and I want to repeat it, in the midst of the crisis, this government said, we will give you support, but which will be long term. Right now, medium and long term. Right now, Manrega shot up. Medium to long term, capital expenditure started increasing. Can you imagine in the midst of a crisis, somebody is increasing capital expenditure? That's the vision. And this year, the capital expenditure expansion continues and substantial. That means the multiplier effect is there. That means the intergenerational transfer is taking place of growth and employment. That means not only today, this crisis, which can come in different waves, 5 generally, if you follow the Spanish flu of 1918, this crisis can continue till 2027 for the Western world. 23 is almost washed out. 23, 24 could be recessionary in the Western world. But in our country, the vision is there and capital expenditure. First, continuity. Second, the gross fiscal deficit, the glide path for that, which was determined, that is still within the reach and is being discussed in the midst of global crisis. You see, if there was anybody with a weak knee or a weak heart, would have said, our exports are going to get impacted. Russia-Ukraine war, supply side is totally devastated. How can I follow the consolidation path, glide path, which was decided before all this happened? No. But here is a strong steel reserve. And they say we follow the glide path. And not only say, what have they done? They said we are reducing the gross fiscal deficit from 6.4 to 5.9. And may I tell you, they have very conservatively estimated nominal growth rate at 10.5%, which according to me is conservative, or at least low by 1%, if not by 200 basis points, 2%. Because if your inflation is going to be around 5-6%, which is a 30-year average, and your growth is expected, real growth is expected to be 6.57, then your nominal growth rate for GDP should easily be 12.5. Certainly 11.5. They have estimated 10.5. Now just imagine if the economy grows at 12.5%, the GST collection, the income tax, corporation, all those taxes are going to increase. And therefore, the gross fiscal deficit, which has been technically shown as reducing by only 50 basis points from 6.4 to 5.9, could reduce much faster. Or at least they will have space for putting money more in places that probably will come up and need to be put. The second thing, very conservative GDP estimate. The second thing, if you look at the correction which has been shown in the budget, on revenue deficit, the correction is the maximum, 4.1 to 2.9. That shows that the quality of adjustment is simply pristine. That's all we all economists have said. When you borrow, the borrowing should go for capital expenditure. And here, in the midst of a crisis, and this is the last full-time, full-year budget before the election, this could have been used for any purpose, fully justified. Me, you, other economists, public policy experts would have said, you have to understand they have a compulsion, but nothing doing. The adjustment is on the revenue account. And that is where I say it needs courage to do such a thing. And that's what provides continuity. So the government, unlike, and as economists, we all know that the political cycles very quickly start getting reflected in budgetary cycles. But here, the government, with the confidence with which they are conducting and the responsibility with which they are conducting fiscal policy is really appreciated. Even in the Western world, who had the resources, they have been reckless. In our country, they have been far more responsible, and accountable behavior is there. That provides the continuity to me. Now, obviously, my own overall thought is that the budget has provided continuity. Now, as economists, what are we really chasing? What are we really worried about? We are all worried about growth. While we want to grow on a personal level, we also want that the nation should grow and our students should get employment as they come out of their universities, and there should be vibrant economy everywhere. That's what we economists and we public policy experts want. Is this budget growth oriented? So first point I've already made, capital expenditure. It is growth oriented. Second, in a country which is enjoying demographic dividend, and please remember, demographic dividend is not for all times to come. There are estimates which have been made that the demographic dividend would be available to India till about 2046. We have to use it by that time. Otherwise, it continuously becomes a disaster and it could become a demographic deficit for us. Now, if we are going to tap demographic dividend, what are the two places which are our reservoirs? Our first reservoir is the youth. Problem is that if you do not engage youth in a productive way, what will youth do? It has to stay engaged. It has a sharp mind. It has young muscles and legs and arms. It'll either shift to weapons or to drugs. Both the examples are there in our country. Punjab is in the grip of drugs, and Chhattisgarh and those areas are in the grip of Naxal movements. You have to keep the youth engaged. Therefore, I say, don't give them dole. Give them an employment opportunity. Keep them engaged. The mind and body should be engaged. The youth should get tired by evening in mind and body and should just go in a slump. That's exactly what the government is doing. It is giving them opportunity after opportunity to stay engaged in some way or the other. Now, where is our youth? Partly our youth is in rural areas and partly in urban areas. So in rural areas, they have come out now with fabulous schemes. You must have heard. Have you heard of an agriculture accelerator? I think it's a great idea. They're thinking in terms of, okay, there are hubs, there are incubators, but we need an agriculture accelerator fund to encourage agri startups. What more can you ask for? Secondly, they're saying they want to now push millets. Opens up very new opportunities. Just 5 years back, did you ever know that millets was something, a buzzword we can tap? We are short of water. Our Punjab and Haryana soil is totally deprived and bad because of the intense fertilizers that have been used. Now the government is coming out with a brand new innovative idea in the last few years about millets, and that continuity is there. They've also started thinking in terms of fisheries and encouraging it. And therefore, when I look at this whole story of agriculture, and I think, okay, the youth is there, they are going to tap agriculture, improve. Other things are there, which are there in the budget, which I think is, they've spoken about cluster-based and value chain approach in public-private partnership. And they've also spoken about collaboration between farmers, state, and industry for input supplies, extension services, market linkages. All that is there, traditional. But the two innovative ideas that I looked at and I found them very, very good. And of course, I told you about fisheries. I thought that was a great idea that they're bringing in. The second thing, for me, skilling is important. So they're bringing in Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana, that each one is able to engage himself and work. And then they've come out with a national apprenticeship promotion scheme, and then the Skill India digital platform. So the youth are going to be engaged, and I have a feeling you and me work with youth. You and me work in the university environment. You and me, Kalyan, you have been at IIM Bangalore, now you are at IIM Visakhapatnam. You know the youth, on an average, is brilliant. Be it in IIM Bangalore, be it in Visakhapatnam. They are brilliant, their minds are brilliant, they're restless. And if you are able to engage them across the country, if they join the workforce in a productive way, can anybody stop India from growing at 8%? Next thing, female. Now, this is a tragedy of our country, that we have literate female, we have hardworking females, but we do not have their hard work captured in GDP. Now, tell me a female who's sitting idle here, but in the GDP, when it comes, we don't value it. And in the workforce, labor force, female labor force participation, our figures for female labor force participation is the lowest in the world. It is worse than many countries which do not let their women go out of the house. But in the neighboring countries, against the global average of about 60% female labor force participation, in the neighboring countries as high as 80%. So in the Southeast culture, where we are contextually located, it's not that if we give opportunity to our women, they will not work. As it is, it's not true that women don't work. They're already working in the field, only thing is they're not accounted for. So now, as I look at it, the women are being brought into the system. So how do you grow? You grow with labor and capital. On the labor aspect, youth is being tapped. Women are going to be tapped through these self-help groups. Now, as you know, and somebody just read it, I was a member of the board of NABARD Financial Services, which is working at the grassroots level. I've gone and visited self-help groups myself, microcredit activities I've done myself, visiting fields. Women have great potential, and they're far more financially responsible than we men. And if you're able to engage them through self-help groups, you've done a revolutionary work. And other thing is the Mahila Saman Savings Certificate, which is being discussed. I'm excited about it. You look, the Jan Dhan Yojana tried to bring in women into the financial sector, but despite that, because our culture and ethos, whenever a male business correspondent goes to the village household, generally the man intervenes. And therefore, the women is still not allowed to have an interface with the male business. If there's a female business correspondent, it's okay, but not with the male. But most of them are men. Now, moment the man intervenes, the empowerment of the women is lost because the password is being used by the male counterpart and the money is being held in the hands of the male counterpart. Again, it gets misutilized. But somebody is thinking in the country about encouraging women to economically get engaged. And I really like the Mahila Saman thing. Then comes, which is the other labor force, which is underutilized, tribals. So if you want to grow, you need labor and capital. On the labor, You are tapping the youth, you are tapping women, and now you're going to tap the tribals. So special schemes have been talked about tribals. And they have, I'm excited about this idea. We have all heard about World Trade Center. In major commercial cities of the world, World Trade Center is there. Local industrial products, you come and meet them. It is there in Bombay, it is there in Delhi, it was there in New York. Now they're going to have a unity mall for the artisans.
Maximum.
Right? So what I'm saying is they are going to bring in, tap the vulnerable tribal groups. There's going to be a development mission for them. They're going to be brought in, engaged, trained, and their products brought into the unity mall. So then the issue is that if they are able to tap these segments of the population, which augment the labor force, we have gained a lot. Now, final point in growth comes to finance. You need labor and capital to grow. And what have they done on finance? Many things, starting from hitting the ground running with the Jan Dhan Yojana in the very first few months, of his taking over. The Prime Minister has pushed the financial sector to grow and provide oxygen to the rest of the economy to make it comfortable for them to grow. So now what have they done in that? They have brought in, firstly, the concept of a national financial information registry. So database is going to get created, and flow of credit, promote financial inclusion, foster financial stability will become automatic because there'll be this registry. The second, the green financing is being discussed now in a big way. There's going to be green credit that is being discussed. I'm also thrilled with the idea of shifting to organic farming and natural farming. Having suffered the consequences of intensive use of chemicals, NPK, in Haryana and Punjab, soil totally desertified, soil life totally destroyed. Even if they want in Punjab to go back to their earlier life of multiple cropping, they cannot, because the soil is dead and gone. So taking steps within the time of going for natural fertilizers, avoiding chemical fertilizers, I think something appreciable, and going for green credit. So to me, the budget is, to sum up, providing continuity, which is important for a fiscal policy, is growth oriented because it's providing support to the vulnerable sections which were not actively engaged or needed to be brought in actively into the workforce, providing support in finance. The final point I'm making is, and which I've already made, I'm just now highlighting, is that capital expenditure is futuristic. And therefore I say this budget is growth oriented, futuristic, and providing continuity with the past. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, sir, for that, the overall summary of how you've seen at the budget, and I can scarcely disagree. Now, I don't want to hog all the airtime. I will let our student members as well as our faculty who are here quickly ask a couple of questions, or rather 3 questions. And then towards the end, I will get a chance to interact on behalf of all of our students and faculty with you separately. So any questions from the panelists who are present, who may want to ask a quick question? Yes, I see Akshay raising his hand. Unmute yourself and please go ahead, Akshay, and then Deepak can follow. And then
yeah. So I had a question related to organic farming, as sir mentioned that we should adapt to organic farming as sooner as possible. And our soils have been degraded, but there have been countries which have actually switched to organic farming earlier, but they have that has not been enough fruitful for them? And what kind of a blend do you expect if you expect organic farming and the non-organic farming to go well in? Because farmers need to be enough aware about how this entire process should be shifted, or how the traditional process needs to be shifted to the organic process, because that will take a really long time. So what do you expect, like how this shift should happen?
It's a very good question. I totally agree with you. But let me give you a simple example to understand. If we are shifting towards millets, so millets, the intensive use of chemical fertilizers happened with the high yield variety seeds, which were used extensively in Haryana and Punjab. Now, because we are shifting to a new cropping pattern, and that's millets, there is a possibility that we may not need that much of high intense chemical fertilizers. That transition itself is something very good. In the second stage, we have been talking about the Gobardhan, the waste from the animals being utilized, which is the traditional way in our Indian context, and it has been experimented at different places and being utilized. That is showing results. Now, obviously, I totally agree with you. How do we immediately change? Immediate change is not going to be possible. We have agriculture universities in every state, and we also have through NABARD, we have block development officers and people working at every level across the country. So once this idea is mooted and transmitted, the blend should automatically come. So I don't see it's going to happen tomorrow, but I certainly feel, because it's a positive trend and because we are thinking in terms of a different cropping pattern, we are thinking of encouraging millets. To that extent, it's going to become very natural and quick. The Northeast is another place which is full of natural resources, and I don't think it needs chemical fertilizers at this point of time to really enhance productivity. Lots of money has been pumped through this budget into Northeast. And to that extent, if we are able to do agro processing in Northeast, and that is a place where you find lots of fruits and vegetables and even flowers. To that extent, we'll be able to bring them, enhance the farmers' income, but also wean them away from natural fertilizers or from chemical fertilizers into natural fertilizers.
Yeah, Deepak, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
First of all, good morning, sir. It's an honor to be learning from you. My question is, like you mentioned, that investment capital and expenditure has been increased a lot recently. In fact, this time it has been increased continuously for the third year. This year it has been hiked by 33% to reach to a total of 10 lakh crores. And in a Morgan Stanley report, it was stated that private capex has recently begun its path, to jump on the recovery path. It has risen to a 10-year high in the past June to a 10.2%. So my question is, will it lead to a crowding out if government keeps investing in the capital expenditure continuously?
Brilliant question.
Or,
Brilliant question. On crowding out, crowding in, I'm sure Professor Bhanumurthy would have more stories to share with you because he comes from National Institute. But let me tell you my quick thoughts on it. Where is the capital expenditure going to take place? From there, we'll be able to make out, will it lead to crowding in or not? My observation is lead to crowding in. And why do I say that? Now, where is the money going to go? And look at the schemes that people who are thinking and their advisors are very good. So money is going to go into railways in a big way. Now in railways, firstly, bullet train is coming and fast trains are coming and tracks have to be laid, partly labor intensive. And all the corridor which will develop around which these things are going to happen, villages and towns around it are also going to develop. Much money is being earmarked for roadways and coastal waterways. Now imagine we are developing a coastal waterway around the coast, wherever the ship is going to take you or wherever your waterways will work, that area will develop. If you are having a high-speed roadway from Delhi to Bombay, areas around that are going to develop. Obviously, corridors means lots of private investment gets sucked in. Then they're also thinking in terms of 50 additional, now please listen carefully, 50 additional airports, heliports, water aerodromes, advanced landing zones. Some of these terms are new to me also, right? What does it mean? These 50 places where this is going to happen, private investment is going to come in. They also want to develop critical transport projects, 100 of them, for last mile connectivity in steel, coal. They're also going to bring in lots of local area development. So to my mind, this critical capital expenditure is going to, of course, borrowings are large. I'm not denying it. 34% of the total expenditure is borrowings. I understand that. But the borrowings are being used increasingly for capital expenditure. And the capital expenditure is going to provide crowding. So both public, private is going to boom in years to come.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Okay, last question very quickly, Dushyant, if you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, sir, for your insights. So my question is like recently the revenue deficit is like 870,000 crores, in which we are not able to even get the revenue receipt to meet a revenue expenditure, and we have huge interest payments to give because of our borrowings. So sir, I do feel like how sustainable is this, and despite the fact that people are always expecting from the government in the recent budget that to reduce the taxes, so it will reduce the revenue receipts of the government, despite the fact that it has increased due to GST and demonetization. But people always used to expect that government reduce taxes, and but still we are revenue deficit. Sir, how sustainable is this?
So to my mind, this is reasonably sustainable for two reasons. One is, I told you they have given conservative GDP growth figures. So obviously, if the growth is around 12.5%, revenue collections are going to be certainly higher than where they are today. That is one thing. Secondly, you must be aware of this, and I'm just going to point it out to you, that tax collection in our country is around 17% of GDP. Center and state all put together. The global scene is very different. In the world, tax to GDP ratio is generally 30 to 40%. In some countries, it is even 40% plus. Now in India, somehow because of competitive populism and because of too much of democratization, we are not able to raise tax to GDP ratio. Efforts have been made for many years, like all the years that I remember. Now you use the word demonetization. Now I must share with you, and if I get a chance, I'll not today, of course, but sometimes in my class I used to teach that is demonetization to be seen as a demon which happened suddenly on one fine morning? But no, if you look at the history of India's tax evasion, it's mind-blowing. To just give you a bird's eye view, in 1935, when the Reserve Bank was created, 10,000 rupee note, 5,000 rupee note, and 1,000 rupee note was introduced. 1935. We got independence in 1947. In 1946, the British demonetized the 1,000 rupee note. You know why? Because they suddenly found that the Indians are not paying their taxes, they are hiding it in high denomination notes. Even before we had got independence. And for them, calculation was easy because everything had to go to London. So they found that the tax collection is going down, and the Queen over there is getting worried why tax collection from India is not coming at the same incremental growth rate as it was coming earlier. So and then after that, if you Google, look at the Vanchu Committee, even National Institute of Public Finance and Policy made estimates of the unaccounted money in the country. There were estimates ranging from 20% to nearly 50% of GDP. My personal view is 100% of the economy is unaccounted. Means if 100 is accounted, 100 is unaccounted. Parallel, totally parallel. The estimates which have been scientifically done by scholars, they say about 50% of the economy is unaccounted. So the point I'm making is that things like demonetization have to be seen in the context and not used as a bad word, as a public policy tool. It was necessary when it was brought in, and it has conveyed the meaning. It has made people little and chartered accountants little more careful. So my reading is that with the tax collection buoyancy seen in the last few months, with the number of people who have been brought in under the tax net, the presumptive tax which has been brought it in this budget up to a certain limit makes it very easy. The rationalization of the tax slabs that have taken place, in a way, are going to be like a Laffer curve. They will help us improve the revenue collection. So I'm not too worried that even if the expenditure continues its trajectory, my feeling is we will be able to handle the receipt part. Therefore, the correction on the revenue deficit, to my mind, is doable and achievable.
Thank you, sir.
So thank you, participants, for your questions. In the interest of time now, sir, with your permission, I would like to invite Professor R Bhanumurthy ji to make his remarks. That's okay, sir. Good morning.
Yes. So can I go ahead?
Yes, sir. Please. So you can take about half an hour's time to make your remarks. And then...
I will be a little more brief so that I can get more questions. I think all my time has been taken by, not only time, the topic also been taken by Charan. So he has helped me to reduce my own intervention. So first of all, let me thank, I am Vizag. I used to call Vizag, so I cannot call Visakhapatnam. So I'll call it as Vizag. So I'm from Andhra, so I only know what is Vizag. In terms of the budget, just wanted to, I completely agree with Charan Singh that the budget has been growth oriented, it has a long-term vision, and he also put me in fix, saying that I'm from NIPFP, so I will be speaking a little more on the fiscal part of it. But it's not necessary that everybody in the NIPFP have a same view. So it's we have a completely different view when we talk at NIPFP. So let me take my own view, not an institute view, so that that will give a little bit of a broader perspective what exactly I've been doing for some time. Just wanted to tell Charan, before I joined NIPFP, I did not know fiscal policy. Okay, so I learned anything or whatever it is from learned or unlearned fiscal policy in NIPFP. Okay, so in terms of the budget, yes, I think a lot of economists were doubting that this budget being the last full budget before general election, it could be a populist budget, and some of us were saying it should not go towards that direction. Rather, it should focus more on the long term. And I think thankfully the government has not got into that temptation of getting into the populist budget, except to say that the direct taxes, which have been pending for quite some time, that have been addressed at least after 2 decades. So that seems to have become a headline, although somebody else has grabbed the headlines, not the budget, right? The next day. It was a best budget, could not grab the headlines because of somebody else taken that space. So, and I also realized that, Indian economy or India, I think, moving away from the old tradition, right? You always look for goals before the elections. And I think to that extent, I must say that this budget is a very, very pragmatic budget and not really getting into this nitty-gritty of giving some doles to some sections, some regions, but at the same time, it realizes that the most populist option left for the government is to create employment opportunities, and that can be done only by reviving the growth, and I think that's what they have done. And last 2 years, as Charan very nicely put it up, that India has done extremely well, and it's only building up on what India has done in the last 2 years. And I think he also put very nicely where India is right now compared to other advanced countries. And reports after reports by the international financial institutions like IMF, World Bank, whatever the report you want to take any private sector report also, say that India is a bright spot. Okay. And I think that is something Indian economists should learn. I mean, I must say that Indian economists should learn. Those who are criticizing the government since COVID, that India has not done enough to really help the people to recover from COVID. And I know even today people keep criticizing that India has not done enough for the health sector. I know just before the discussion, some of you said we have not done much for the education sector. And I think there are also a lot of headlines saying that India has done not done much for the agriculture sector. And you do see that there's a reduced allocation for MGNREGS and rural sector. So there are so much of discussion that seems to be happening, but I have a slightly different view on all this thing. My take is that yes, there is a seriousness in terms of sustaining the growth. I must say it is not reviving the growth. For the past 2 years, we have done extremely well, and now there are some headlines that you see in the newspapers that India is going to slow down to 6%. I mean, that is the headline I'm reading when all the advanced countries were actually staring at recession, right? The probability of advanced countries getting into recession is only increasing day by day. Right now, I'm told the 70% probability that advanced countries can get into recession. Now we are talking about India is going to slow down to 6%. I think that is the kind of what to say, the kind of a different view on India. Now 6% at this juncture is, in my view, is extremely positive for Indian economy. And again, as Charan pointed out, India has assumed 10.5% nominal GDP growth for the next year. And there are bets that inflation could be somewhere close to 4%. So if that's the case, I think 6% GDP growth for the next year is almost given. And although it looks like a slightly conservative. Now that there are the couple of students asked questions on the fiscal policy, I just wanted to bring a slight perspective on macro fiscal, where India has been serious enough to continue on the fiscal consolidation roadmap, right? Like Charan said that India is sticking to the glide path of getting into 4.5% fiscal deficit by 25-26. The focus was heavily on infrastructure, capex, as somebody said that it's capital expenditure allocation has increased by 33%. Now this is the first budget where, because there are a lot of students are here, fiscal deficit is nothing but the revenue deficit plus government capital expenditure. Okay, fiscal deficit, if it is 5.9% and revenue deficit is being fixed at 2.9%, that means 3% is the capital expenditure. That is the arithmetic. Okay, FD should be equal to RD plus capex. Okay, and this is the first time the total FD, when you split between the revenue deficit and capital expenditure, the share of capital expenditure is higher than the revenue deficit. Okay, this is the first time after almost 20 years, maybe the high growth period in 2005 and 2006, we have seen a kind of situation, and that was also a beginning of the FRBM Act. I'm sure some of you know that FRBM Act, it's called FRBM Act 2003. right? So it has started in 2003, and that was the time it was very seriously taken up, and there was a sharp adjustments happening on the fiscal deficit and revenue deficit, and that was the period where we have seen that capex share is higher than the revenue expenditure. Again, I just wanted to bring it to your notice about the basics of the FRBM. Now, the FRBM Act says that fiscal deficit should be brought down to 3%, right? And the revenue deficit should be brought down to 0%. Then what is the capex? Capex should be 3%, right? So that means you should not borrow for consumption purpose. That is, the revenue deficit should be equal to 0, means you should not borrow for consumption purpose. Anything you are borrowing for the fiscal deficit, that is 3%, should actually go for the capex. Okay. So the philosophy of the FRBM Act is basically shifting the revenue expenditure to capital expenditure. Okay. So people talk about FRBM, fiscal consolidation is expenditure compression mechanism. No, FRBM is basically expenditure switching mechanism. In fact, I think I'm the only fellow who did a lot of sin on that area. I have been doing this FRBM Act for last 3 finance commissions, the 13th Finance Commission, 14th Finance Commission, as well as for the 15th Finance Commission. So I know the mechanism. I just want to tell you that if you have a situation where your fiscal deficit is equal to 3% and the revenue deficit is 0, then actually the revenue expenditure in that scenario is much larger than a situation where you are not targeting the revenue deficit. Okay, fine. I mean, I hope I have made my point clear. And the reason, the whole basic reason for this is there is a small concept called multiplier, fiscal multiplier. And the fiscal multiplier, the assumption is that the capex multiplier is larger than the revenue expenditure. Okay. When I say that, if you're spending 1 rupee on capital expenditure, you produce somewhere close to 4 rupees. I think in the first year of the allocation, you get around 2.45 rupees of output. That means 1:2.45, right? And there is also a cumulative multiplier, which is over a period of 5 to 6 years, where you get for 1 rupee of capex, you get more than 4 rupees of output. So that is the mechanism. Against to the capex, the revenue expenditure multiplier is less than 1. That means if you are spending 1 rupee on the revenue expenditure, the output that you get from that 1 rupee is less than 1 rupee. That is 0.9 or 0.98. That is the basis for a capex strategy that India has adopted, and it has done extremely well. And the 2.45 is the capex multiplier. I'm happy to tell that is my number actually. This is the study that I have done in 2013, and it has become, I'm glad that it has become a basis for the last 3-year budgets, and I think it is there in the economic survey also, and I think it is there in fact, yesterday, Dr. Bibek Debray wrote in Financial Express, he quotes this number, and this is there in the last 3 budgets. I mean, I don't want to publicize too much on that, but I'm also scared that, after that, if India doesn't do well, they will start blaming my study. So I don't want to do that. And I was glad I have written some 70, 80 papers, but the shelf life of this particular paper seems to be longish than what I thought. But there are many more studies that have come up right now. But so 2.45 is not a sacrosanct number, right? But it gives an impression, it gives a feeling. I mean, at least it gets a kind of insight that quality of expenditure does matter if you want to really intervene. As Charan pointed out, the reason why the advanced countries which went for a larger fiscal stimulus got into highly inflationary conditions, and now they are getting into recessionary conditions because of very poor quality of expenditure that they had, and large part of the expenditure is actually gone for consumption purpose. When there are supply constraints, higher consumption demand led to higher inflationary pressure. I think that's what is happened. Now, in the case of India, we have done it slightly differently. Like capital expenditure doesn't lead to inflationary condition because it's actually getting into increasing the supply capacities, and it creates more employment, and then in the next stage, actually it creates more output. So there is a difference between the capex and there is a difference between consumption expenditure. Now, if you have a simple identity where you have a C equal to Y equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M, the G component always creates aggregate demand, right? But it doesn't create aggregate supply, right? So it increases your nominal GDP, but it doesn't increase the real GDP. So what happens is in the absence of response from the real GDP, any increase in the nominal GDP will actually lead to inflation, right? The nominal GDP should be equal to real GDP plus inflation. On the other hand, if you are increasing the investment component, I component, where it also creates aggregate demand, but at the same time, these investments are getting into production activity, because production function is a function of investment. So the aggregate supply also responds. So if your nominal GDP should be equal to real GDP plus inflation, so increase in the nominal GDP will lead to increase in real GDP, and there's not much response from the inflation condition. So there is a distinction between how the government interfere in that aggregate demand function. So if they interfere through I component, it will actually have a positive impact on real GDP. And if it goes through the G component, it will have impact on the inflation rate. So we have followed a strategy where we actually stimulate the I component of the aggregate demand, and I think that really worked well. And this I've been arguing for past 12 years. I'm glad that now people agree, and this is the time I must stop talking about that strategy. So that people. I mean, let me go to the next topic. Okay, so about the budget, this is what I thought, but unfortunately, there are a couple of issues I thought, let me bring it to your to the discussion. The compression that we talked about in the revenue deficit, as Charan Singh also pointed out, where it's coming down from 4.1% to 2.9%. There are two things is happening. One, there is a substantial reduction in the subsidy component. Okay, the subsidy component is being brought down by almost 5.47 lakh crore, both in terms of food subsidy and also in terms of the fertilizer. And on the assumption that the subdued international prices will continue for the next year, and again, that's an important aspect, and I'm sure I think we'll be in a better position to really manage it. But those who want to criticize, they will criticize that the government is reducing the subsidy. Actually, the subsidy is reduced not because they want to reduce it. It is because of the, I told you my second topic is about public expenditure efficiency. Now, we economists stop talking about efficiency, or rather we just start talking about only the outlays. Now we don't talk about what happens later, right? I think this is my grudge with the profession, where we always think that there is a decline in the allocation of this sector, that sector, and all those things, but we don't talk about the outcome-based things. Now, if you look at one of the best things that happened in the last, I will not say only 7 years or 8 years, maybe last 10 years, especially after we got into this Aadhaar systems, where we also got into the direct benefit transfer systems. And so I'm not making a political statement here. The DBT was there much before even the government came. Now, the point is, ultimately, it is the improvement in the public delivery mechanism, right, which has actually led to a lot of savings. I can tell you so many examples for this. Even PM Kisan, it's a very popular program. When you start saying that it will be delivered through the DBT system, you see that it's the outgo of that program is just 70%. Right? Now, somebody would say that this is a very, very limited allocation, but even that allocation we are not able to disburse. So in a sense, when we start linking with the digital technology, start linking with the Aadhaar based, linking with the banking sector, now you see that you don't need that much money for that particular scheme. Now the PM Kisan is the most popular scheme, right? I mean, you just have to transfer to farmers, right? And you are not able to transfer that resources. So the issue that I'm trying to bring it to notice is It is the public expenditure efficiency that matters most. I don't see if there is any dearth of resources in India. And those who are sitting in Vizag, they know Andhra also has so much of money flows into, I'll not say the drains, but, there's so much money, just keep throwing money actually. So there is no dearth of money in this system. But most importantly, where it is going, how it is utilized, what kind of multiplier impact it has on the economy or people, is something that we economists should really focus now on it. Then the other risk for this is the disinvestment target. The government, I don't know, somewhere I saw in the newspaper, somewhere it says 51,000 crore, but actually I read in the budget document it's somewhere close to 61,000 crore. I don't know what is the correct number, but still I would say that one of the biggest risks for this budget is the kind of performance of the government in terms of generating resource through the disinvestment process. So, so that is another risk for the fiscal deficit numbers. But a broad one important thing that I thought, let me bring in, again, I'm thinking aloud, what this budget does is that I'm sure many of you know that the finance minister was really frustrated when she said that, there's so much of money has been pumped into the economy in terms of the public investments, but there's also a lot of incentives have been created in terms of PLI, and there are so many things. Why the private sector is not actually investing, right? And one of the reasons what the industry has said is that there is no demand in the economy, right? I think that is what, and it looks like this government, this particular budget is focusing more on reviving the domestic consumption, and that's something that they have done by tinkering the direct taxes, and their own estimate says that there'll be somewhere close to 35,000 crore additional resources will be left with the middle class, so that there'll be consumption happen, because given that middle class has a larger MPC, so any additional resources in their hands will lead to larger consumption. But at the same time, you would have seen that insurance companies and the banking sector stocks actually declined during the budget presentation, with the assumption that the proposal that is there in the budget may not encourage savings. Okay, so between consumption and savings, it looks like government is trying to balance the delicate, the delicate balance between the consumption and savings, and the assumption that in the current year, in the absence of external demand, because we know that global demand is going to subdued because of the recessionary conditions, in the absence of external demand, I think there may be some effort to revive the domestic demand so that the private sector would start investing. But at the same time, if you look at I think one of the students asked the question that if you look at the kind of a borrowing program that they have kept for the country this year, 5.9% is the fiscal deficit, but if you add at least 3.5% for the state governments, you are staring at least 9.5% fiscal deficit for the both center and state together in the current year. Now, this 9.5% has to be financed by the domestic savings, right? We don't depend on the foreign savings, and somebody can ask why India cannot borrow from foreign savings. But one of the things that we have done since 1991 is to rely less on foreign savings, and that has actually done extremely well for us. We have not faced the kind of shocks that global financial sector has actually faced, because of the one simple reason that our external debt component in our total debt is extremely minuscule. So there is no risk of withdrawal of the foreign saving from the economy whenever the economy faces shocks. So even during the global financial crisis, even during the Asian crisis, and even during 1991, we have not defaulted. Okay, those young students, those who are here, I'm sure you are not born during 1991. But if you want to understand what you meant by default, You must look at what's happening in Sri Lanka. You should look at what's happening in Pakistan, and you also should look at what's happening in Bangladesh right now. So we never defaulted for a simple reason that our external debt component is very small on our government accounts. So in that kind of a situation, whatever the fiscal deficit, 9.5%, has to be generated domestically. Okay. And now currently the household saving, the financial savings about 10.5 to 11%. So if the 9% or 9.5% going for government financing the fiscal deficit, you only left with 1% or 1.5% for the private sector. So there's some disturbance, please.
Just a quick check. I would ask any of the panelists whose mic is switched on involuntarily to switch it off so that Professor Bhanumurthy can speak.
Yeah, I think it's switched off now. Okay. So given that kind of a situation, any policy measure that discourages savings will only put a little more pressure on the domestic liquidity. And there is already discussions on this that in the coming year, because of this, pressure on the domestic savings, there would be a pressure on the interest rates. I think now the interest rate go up, what will happen? Again, I don't want to get into that. So between the consumption and savings, I thought the government should have done it a little more delicate balancing. Otherwise, we might end up with a larger interest rates in the coming year. While RBI is trying to reduce it, maybe the pressure would be on the banking sector to increase the interest rate so that, especially the deposit rates, so that you generate more domestic savings. So that is another macro inconsistency, I thought, in the budget. And how much time I have?
Maybe 10 minutes more, sir. And then if you want.
I'll take 5 more minutes and then I'll complete it. One more topic and I'll just stop there. So as I said that, the external demand is not there in the coming year because of the recession. One of the important engines of our GDP, again, y equal to c plus I plus g plus x minus m. That is the basic for macroeconomics. The biggest engine is the trade component, that is the X component, the exports component. The exports are actually started dwindling even right now. And going forward, because of the recession, you might see that some more contraction on the export sector. And for this, you need to understand what determines exports. And so the exports are largely determined by the external demand, that is the global GDP growth. Now, the global GDP is expected to be negative, then you know what will happen to your export. So here I thought the government should have done a little more on the exports. Again, another determinant of exports, again, these are some of the empirical thing that all of you should do it, that another determinant of exports, in addition to the external demand, is the import tariffs. And I think this is, counterintuitive for many students who study the basic macroeconomics, right? But I just want to tell you that empirical macroeconomics is quite different from the macroeconomics you read in textbooks. And I always keep saying that Indian macroeconomics is different from the textbook macroeconomics. And public policy, whenever we do public policy, you cannot depend on the textbooks. You always depend on the empirics of the day, okay? Not even the empirics 10 years back or 20 years back, but empirics of the day is very important. So if you look at the exports today, I'm sure some of you would have done some empirics. Now, exports, particularly the manufacturing sector exports, is basically a function of external demand and the import tariff. Okay, you will ask me why import tariff. So we are talking about import-led export growth hypothesis, where larger your import of intermediate goods, it will increase your efficiency and it will increase your competitiveness. That's how you actually export, right? And what happened in post 1991? Again, those who read India's economic reforms, the biggest reforms happened on in the post 1991 was on the trade side. Okay, And within the trade side, it was on the import side, right? It has actually, India has brought down the import tariffs from 300% or 400% to less than 10%. Okay, that is the biggest reform that happened. These kids may not know during our, I mean, when we are small kids, if you want to buy a transistor radio, you have to go to Burma Bazaar or the China Bazaar in Chennai. It's basically a smuggled goods. But if you want to buy in the open market, you have to pay 300% tariff. So that is the expensive thing that we had, and that reforms were initiated in 1991. And those days there used to be this big bulky book which used to be called custom tariff lines, okay, as part of the budget document. Again, students, those who are depending only on the laptops and computers, please have also look at physical copies of the budget documents. There are 10 documents in the budget, and one used to be the big one, which is to be a customs tariff line. And over a period of time, that whole book was removed because the number of lines were limited. So the book was removed. That means we have actually liberated the whole import side, except in one or two commodities. And that actually helped India to export, become one of the biggest exporter of some of the commodities. And it actually improved our competitiveness also. But in the past 3-4 years, again, the book has reappeared as part of the budget document. Okay, that means we literally started talking about what is called Atmanirbhar Bharat, right? In the translation, it is called self-reliant India, but that's the problem with the translation. It doesn't mean that we want to close the import sector. So, and I think some of the ministry think that Atmanirbhar Bharat means close the imports. So they started bringing back this import, what is the customs tariff line book, and then they created a lot of confusion. And we have been arguing that India need to liberalize imports, okay? And I think we were hoping that will happen, but if you look at the kind of proposal that finance minister brought it only led to more confusion actually. It was told it was brought down from 21% to 13%, but if you look at many commodities, they actually added many more commodities as part of the import tariff basket. So I think that will not really help India's exports, and that is one reason why we are saying that India cannot grow more than 6% in the next year. So the export component in the GDP could add at least 200 basis points to your GDP, and because of this kind of policy, India may not really have exports growing at positive growth. So one more last point, and I will stop. So one more last point. This is something that since I've been part of this macro modeling and forecasting, I always think 2-3 quarters ahead. That is my problem. That is my disease actually. Now I am looking at a situation where then going the next year, that is FY24, we might face a crisis in the agriculture sector. Again, I'm as I told you, that's a disease for me actually. For a simple reason, if you look at the long-term data, 30 years or 40 years of agriculture sector, there was no history that says India has sustained an average of 4% growth in the agriculture sector for more than 3 years. Okay, so now we have seen the agriculture sector growing above 4% for the past 3 years. That is during COVID period, the 2021, 21-22, and 22-23 also. So we already seen that above average 4% growth in the last 3 years, and so the long-term trend suggests me that fourth year cannot repeat the 4%. So okay, so it has to be less than 4%. Second is that if you look at a simple production function, output is a function of input, right? I mean, that's how we know. So agriculture output is a function of inputs, that is factors of production, right? Land, labor, capital. And for agriculture, we also have to have rainfall, right? These are the 4 inputs that we have. Now, let me come to the rainfall. Rainfall, there are already predictions that this year, the La Nina effect, which is supposed to be which will lead to lesser rainfall. The La Nina effect probability is very high. In fact, the Global Met Department is saying that it's going to be at least 90% probability that India might face a La Nina effect. So the rainfall in the next year, the coming monsoon season, would be less than what we have seen in the last year. Second is the labor, right? Are you okay? Yeah. So the second is labor, right? Now, post-COVID, we have seen a lot of people moving from urban to rural areas, right? I mean, that we have seen that there is a big, reverse migration that happened. Now, after 2 years of the COVID, for the past quarter, at least from September onwards, we have seen an improvement opening up the activities, especially the contact intensive activities like construction, trade, hotels, other services, they started opening up. And we do see that people coming back to urban clusters from the rural area. So the labor, the additional labor which went to the rural areas is actually coming out of the agriculture sector. And that is visible. In fact, if you look at the construction activity, there is an improvement in the construction activity. And I don't think I should say what's happening in the airports, right? There is already airports are fully crowded, and you see that transport. These are all leading indicators for us to suggest that the contact intensive sector actually started opening up in a big way. So the labor movement shifting from agriculture to non-agriculture again is happening. And because of this, like for example, COVID period, when there was reverse migration happened, there is one statistics which was very, very glaringly given to all of us, was that there is a sudden jump in the land area under cultivation by 40%. That's because the people who went from the urban clusters went back to their old farms, which was not part of the cultivation, and suddenly they were bringing that particular land under cultivation. For the same logic, if the people moving from rural to urban, you should see that withdrawal of that land from the cultivation. So you must see that land under cultivation may also decline. And then the third is the capital part. The fourth is the capital part. Now, as I said, there is already a liquidity tight conditions happening. I'm sure Dr. Manoranjan Sharma will talk about it. The liquidity tight conditions already showing up on all the banking sector. I don't know if somebody's seen in the Twitter, there's one bank agent going with a mic and going to the shops for attracting more deposits, right? In Bombay roads, because the banks are really, waiting for deposits to come, because there is a revival in the overall private sector credit, but they don't have liquidity. Okay, so given that kind of situation, providing resources to the agriculture sector again is going to be limited, because the banks might prefer the manufacturing sector or the service sector, non-agriculture sector for that matter, because the people are really willing to borrow loan at a slightly higher interest rate than what the banks would be giving to the agriculture sector. So land, labor, capital, rainfall, all four is expected to be constrained in the current year, and obviously the output will show up that kind of effect. Again, I told you this is my imaginary kind of thing, but this is based on my own experience for the past 20 years in this profession. Generally, I am not right on the spot. And the hindsight, I am right. So maybe next year when we meet, you will know what I'm saying. And this happens to me all the time. So I will be criticized when I say something, but after 6 months, they keep talking about what I said. So same thing happened with the fiscal multiplier. Same thing happened with the interest rate strategy. So all those things, I'm not selling my idea, but I just want, it's part of fun for me. So I keep thinking 2 quarters ahead of others. So that's how I think. So given this kind of a risk, Okay. Given this kind of a risk, I thought fiscal policy needs a little more flexibility than a very tight conditions like we say 5.9. Now, all the time, what happens, 5.9, if government breaches to 6, they say that newspapers will write that there is a huge fiscal slippage by the government, right? If it becomes from 5.9 to 6%. So this is where I have been arguing for some time. As part of the Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act, there is a need for fiscal policy to be flexible. So I keep arguing there is a need for flexible fiscal deficit targeting. Okay, this is a slightly broader thing that I'm bringing here. You have a flexible inflation targeting, right? There's an alternative policy. There's a monetary policy, and there's a fiscal policy. There's a two policies that is left. So when the monetary policy has a flexible inflation targeting regime, especially their policies are a little more frequent, that every 2 months you have policy. On the other hand, you have a fiscal policy where you cannot even have an anticipated shocks endogenized as part of your fiscal deficit, leave alone unanticipated shock, right? So I have been arguing that even in the FRBM Act, there is a need for flexible fiscal deficit targeting so that the governments of the day will not be constrained by in fudging the numbers. In fact, you force the governments to fudge the numbers, otherwise the market would react differently. Okay. So I think, in fact, I wrote when this 15th Finance Commission work was going on, I kept on saying that fiscal policy needs flexibility. So I think there is a need for flexible fiscal deficit targeting, right? So I think that is where I come, but I'll be happy to take more questions, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
So thank you, sir, for that, for those remarks. If you, like, again, if the participants will indulge me, I'll tell you of the fanboy moment that I have. I often refer the students to your article on the fiscal multipliers that you co-wrote with Professor Sukanya Bose. When discussing the Keynesian multiplier effect on the economy, to show how the quality or grade of government spending in capital versus transfers or subsidies matters to the economy, etc., etc. I hope the students, at least the sections that I interacted with, get that to epiphany, or at least recollect the idea that 2.45 is not a small multiplier. It is a phenomenal multiplier when it comes to capital spending, and it is evident, when the country spends on necessary infrastructure, which we should have done probably in the early stages after independence. Probably we are doing it after 75 years, but nevertheless, it has a great. So your paper, as you said, we are aware, and without further ado, I'll just quickly ask one or two questions, if there are any, to Professor R Bhanumurthy. Anyone in the audience here wants to ask something? We could, and then quickly we can go to Dr. Manoranjan Sharma. Okay, Vikram Reddy, and then Deepak. Quickly, yeah, unmute yourself and ask.
Thank you, sir, for clearing the doubts regarding the financial deficit, the components which you have clearly explained, sir. So my question is, like, as you have seen, like the taxes initially it used to be 5 lakhs is the point where below we need not to pay any taxes. Right now it has been taken to the 7 lakhs slab, sir. So due to this, how the revenue receipt component will be affected, and further, as you said, like revenue deficit also, sir, how these two things will be impacted based on this slab change, sir?
No, I think FML already made it very clear. The total tax proposals would have a revenue foregone of something like 38,000 crore. Okay, and there will be revenue mobilization of 3,000 crore something. So the net revenue foregone, they've already estimated before some mischievous economists will say it is not 35 crore, maybe 3 lakh crores, something like that. So they already, preempted us to estimate that. So they said 35,000 crores. So you must believe that. So that is the revenue foregone. But I think the purpose is not just, the revenues. I think what they are trying to do is to also increase that base so that, if you reduce, if you enhance the tax slab, their expectation is that more people can come under the tax net. So that is also a strategy. And I think, as Charan very passionately pointed out, I think we are a country where only 6% of people pay income tax. I think that's a joke. Is a serious joke in my view. It is not really going well with the country which is aspiring to become second largest or third largest economy in the world, with a 6%, only 6% people paying income tax. I think any effort, whether you pay 1 rupee tax or 2 rupee tax, doesn't matter, but you should be part of the tax net. I think that's the most important. That means you should have a more formal sector. So any policy measure that will improve your tax base is something you should not always count in terms of how much money is lost or how much money is gained. But I think it's very important to bring more people into the tax net. In fact, there are some proposals to remove the income tax itself. So you would have seen that. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Shall I ask Professor Shalini if you want to quickly ask a question, and then we'll come to Deepak, if that's okay. Deepak and then Dushyant. Professor Shalini, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. It is always pleasure, Professor Bhanumurthy, sir, to listen to you. I'm not an economist, but my question can be a little bit irrelevant also regarding this context. But reading about the current scenario, we saw that in past 2 years, the credit growth has increased, as what the government is bragging, and the NPAs of the bank are decreasing over the time period. So what are the reasons for that? And secondly, even if we are growing at 6.1% and the global economy goes into recession, so how much we are impacted by that?
Yeah, I think the NPA issue, I'm sure Dr. Manoranjan Sharma will be in a better place to talk about it. I just wanted to add here, the NPS is just a function of the growth cycle. Okay. See, unfortunate part, you are a non-economist, I can easily convince you, not the economist. See, unfortunate part is that economists always think linear. Okay. Now, it's like they say that it has to be like linear trend, whether it is increasing or decreasing, doesn't matter. But when it comes to business means there is so much of cycle. Okay. The NPS also follow the business cycles, and even the banks also follow some kind of business cycles. So when the economy is going down, right, you end up with larger NPAs, but then economy recovers, you actually correct your books. So that's what happened in the last 2 years, where the companies or the banks started cleaning up their balance sheets, and that seems to be working well for the NPAs. But not to say that RBI has not done anything, but RBI has been doing something since 2014 or 15. They have brought in a lot of corrective measures so that the banks would not, end up with large NPAs. And we also seen some kind of, mergers of public sector banks. So, even that is also helping the banks to reduce their burden in terms of NPAs. In terms of the other component of your question, that is to what extent a global recession will have impact, I think I already mentioned, because of the global recession, one engine of growth will be affected very badly, that is the export engine. So we need to be ready for assuming that we don't get much support from the export sector, and the 6% is largely would be contributed by the domestic factor, domestic consumption and domestic investments. So if there is a very conducive external environment, Indian economy should be growing at 8%. In the absence of that, we are talking about 6% or 6.5%.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Deepak, quickly, if you can ask it a brief question, go ahead.
Yes, sir. So my question is, in emerging economics like India, the income tax rate kicks in at a very lower purchasing power parity dollar. For example, in India, it's kicking at 10,670, whereas if we compare it with G20 nations, for Germany, for Canada, for Germany it's kicking at 1520 something, 15,000 something, and for Canada it's kicking at 42,515. So what's the pattern here? Is this similar for China also? In China also it's kicking at a lower level. So I see a pattern. What's the reason behind this pattern? If you can throw some light upon that.
No, I think this is what we're saying is, if I understand your question correctly, that India start taxing at the lower end. That's what you are saying, right?
Yes.
Right. So I think that also goes with, for example, advanced countries, their demand for government resources are very limited, right? Because they already established their own infrastructure. The infrastructure deficit is very low there, and also the development deficit is also very low. So in the beginning of their economies, they also would have done what we are doing right now, because you need to generate more resources, so that you need to spend more on social sector as well as infrastructure sector. I think that could be one reason. The second is advanced countries, the tax evasion may be limited. As I told you, 6% have to finance for the 100% population. Now imagine if 100% people are paying taxes, right? You don't need to depend on 6% that much, right? So the whole purpose is that you need to bring more people under tax net, and I'm sure that if that happens, you would not be taxed at $10,000 or whatever you're talking about. Yeah. So you see that get more people into the tax network.
Correct. Thank you so much, sir.
By the way, in the UK, 99% people tax. Okay. Fine. In India, only 6% people tax.
Can I be a maverick here and say this, sir, that maybe the Western, or at least the colonial powers had been taxing their colonies to build their infrastructure and possibly their industrial revolution since a long time. So and they had the not just the domestic borders who were paying taxes, but the colonies themselves were supporting their infrastructure building at, say 200 years ago, if I may. I don't know how true this might be in the data, but I believe when they were taxing Bengal and had settlement rights.
No, you may be right or wrong, possibly. US is not part of colony, right? Canada was not part of the colony, like the way we were. That's what I said. I don't want to get into the history. Let us look forward.
Okay, so Dushyant, quick question. Unmute yourself.
Just correct me if I'm wrong. So you were suggesting that for India to make self-reliant, we have to liberalize our imports, right?
No.
Then
first of all, we should understand what is self-reliance.
Okay.
So self-reliance doesn't mean that import substitution, right? That's what when we said people talk about make in India, I think that is not really meant only for Indians. I think it's for outside world. So there are no economies that flourished by closing the borders. Okay. So I think that's what I said. We lost in the translation. Like Atmanirbhar Bharat, I don't think by any mean it is meant like import substitution policy. Although we still don't know what is the official definition of Atmanirbhar, but it's still an evolving. So unfortunately, it's been translated as an import substitution policy.
Okay, that was my doubt. Thank you.
I still have that doubt.
Thank you, sir, for your remarks. Now, if everyone's okay, we will proceed to invite Dr. Manoranjan Sharma ji. Sir, if you are around, yes.
Can I also take leave? Today is working day, unlike all of you. For me, it's a
Okay.
working day. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. No problem, sir. Then
There's no further question. Then
I think what we perhaps thought was that after Dr. Sharma makes his remarks, we have a set of questions. But if you want to go quickly, can we?
Yeah, that's why I said, yeah, it's better you complete it so that, for me, there are a lot of people waiting to get signatures and all those things. I have a different day.
Okay. So, sir, when you mentioned that we have been focusing on, so one or two questions, if you will allow me, that we have been focusing too much and a lot of analysis is done only on outlays, not on outcomes. So, and evidently economics is about efficiency, which means what output we are getting for every input. So how much do you, and most of this budgeting exercise is in the remit of, let us say, the executive and the legislature. And how much do you think, and this might be a very explosive question, but I'll ask it anyways. But how much do you think should professional economists be involved in the budgeting exercise, in the sense, in terms of understanding what the impact of these programs has been from the past budgets, and then therefore give their recommendations to the government to say these programs have been efficient in their expenditure, these programs have not been, in terms of formal impact evaluation, and then recommend to the government to say this, because we always keep hearing new names to the essentially for the same spending programs, and quite a few number of them already. So we are always, as you said, we are focused on outlays, not on outcomes. How much do you think the professional economists should be involved and can be involved? If I can.
No, I guess professional economists are already been involved. Exposed. Like there are so many evaluation studies happen, right? I think I'm sure all of you are saying that every state undertakes some monitoring and evaluation. I think monitoring and evaluation has been a major component of public policy. On a serious note, I must say that many of the line departments do undertake a serious analysis, right? I know about Ministry of Rural Development and the kind of review that they take and the kind of input they take from the economists are very, very substantial. So there are serious, there are serious efforts made by economists, and they have been involved. Only thing is, unfortunately, I mean, I don't know how to say it. Unfortunately, what happens is that we are always stuck on that outlays. I mean, that is my problem. You be in Delhi, don't go anywhere, just talk about only outlays. I think that's the most unfortunate part. So in fact, public expenditure, as I told you, after this fiscal multipliers, my current research is on public expenditure efficiency. I'm hoping that, in fact, I already did a couple of studies on that and submitted to the 15th Finance Commission. I was hoping that that would become part of the devolution package. If not for COVID-19, I thought they would have done. We economists should focus more on that. Nobody asked me a question why government has reduced allocation on MG and REGs. I would have given a very, very sharp answer on that. Because we need to look at what happened to the previous allocation. I mean, we just don't look at it. So that's something that we economists should learn a lot from the facts. Not just budget is an accounting statement, right? So we need to look at, okay, why instead of 83,000 crore, why only 60,000 crore? I mean, I keep asking, why should you increase all the time? I mean, as I told you, I mean, MG and NRHS is the counter-cyclical measure. Again, when the economy is not in a great shape, the demand for Narega wages go up. When the economy is expected to be doing better, why should we allocate? So I think these are the logical questions that should come to our mind. I am also learning, but I think in public policy, public finance, this public expenditure efficiency should become a core, not just part and parcel, core of fiscal policy. I think that's been my objective. I hope maybe after 5-6 years I'll succeed. Let's see.
Well, thank you, sir, for your valuable time. So that we let you, before you go, if you allow us, we thank you for your time, and the institute as a whole sends its regards to you. And there is a quick small memento that we intend to send to you. I'm sorry if this we have to do this virtually, and on top of it,
Thank you.
The memento we will try, and our director as well as our faculty body sends its regards to you. Thanks for your time. We will make arrangements to send this to your address.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you, Professor, for being here.
Bye.
Thank you, sir.
So, just a quick minute before we invite Dr. Manoranjan Sharma ji. Please stay on. Sir, hello, Dr. Manoranjan Sharma ji, are you there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so sir, apologies to have kept you waiting. Without further ado, now, sir, I'll request you to address us. Share your thoughts on how you see the budget, and what your thoughts about them are.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes, you are, sir.
Okay.
You're not visible much.
There seems to be some oversaturation of your picture, but that's okay, sir. Just a second. Let me just call our IT person before you begin. Sorry about this. Sai, can you come and see? Okay, sir. Our IT person is suggesting that if you can switch off your virtual background, maybe your face will be much more visible. If you can do it, otherwise it's the settings.
I don't know how to do it.
Okay. Can you speak to him? Sir, if you
below that we stop video symbol is there, sir.
Just a second. I will call my son. He knows better. Just 1 second.
Okay, sorry about this. Yeah.
suggest करने के देखिए क्या कह रहा है दिख नहीं रहा
Tell me now.
So if there happens to be some virtual background, can we disable it?
No, sir, there's no virtual background.
There's no virtual background. Can we switch off our this thing that we have? Just a minute, sir. Our IT person is just taking a look at if we can make some arrangement.
Hello, sir.
Sir,
follow this my instructions, sir, please. Yes, the video symbol is there, sir.
Please repeat.
Here, stop video symbol is there in the corner, sir.
Correct.
Sir, click on that up arrow, sir.
Okay.
Now it is good. Now it is good, sir. We'll let it be this way. This is fine.
Perfect.
Okay. I think there could be a camera problem. Sir, we'll not worry too much about this. Sir, you could proceed with your comments.
Okay, am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are.
Okay, sorry, because I'm sitting at my home, so there's no virtual thing. But anyway, these are technological glitches. Well, I'm thankful to Professor Tamli, Professor Kalyan, and other distinguished faculty members for having me with you on this important subject. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to be with Professor Charan Singh, Professor Bhanumurthy. Both have been long and distinguished friends going back several decades. Now, several points have already been covered, most of the important points in the presentation by Dr. Charan Singh and Dr. Bhanumurthy. So I'll just try to hit some of the high spots. Maybe inevitably, I'll try to keep the points of commonalities to a minimum, but inevitably there could be some kind of a repetition. And now I would like to place things in a proper historical and comparative perspective in India, that Kautilya's Arthashastra first mentioned the basic tenets of a budget, and he brought to focus the terms of revenues, expenditure, and fiscal deficit. If you look at the position of India post-independence in terms of Article 112 of the Indian Constitution, the government of the day, central government, is required to present a budget. So in that sense, it is an accounting statement. And the presentation of the budget is a routine thing. But the budget also provides an indication of the state of the economies, priorities of the government, and the use of instruments to realize identified objectives, influence the direction and the pace of the economy. Hence, to my mind, the budget, which is a document of estimates based on assumption and strategies to achieve those estimates, is much more than a public statement of expected government revenues and scheme expenditures over a period of 1 year. I would also like to, I think some ground has been covered by Charan and Bhanumurthy, but because we are passing through difficult times, and my basic submission here is that the budget should not be seen as some kind of a silo, in some kind of an isolation. But it is a microcosm. It's a miniature model of the broader Indian economy. And all of us are aware, I think some reference made by Charan and also by Bhanumurthy. Let me again highlight that we are passing through difficult times coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. To place things in perspective, COVID-19 pandemic, sometimes compared to the Spanish flu of 1999, in terms of the hit caused to lives and livelihoods, in case of its economic impact, it has been compared to the two greatest momentous events of this century, global financial crisis of October 2008 and even the Great Depression of 1929. But the data and information which has been put out in public domain, whether you look at the World Bank, IMF, OECD, Reserve Bank of India, Niti Aayog, they clearly substantiate the thesis that this was a crisis of far-reaching ramifications and ramifications. And in this kind of a world where disequilibrium has become the new equilibrium, in this kind of a new normal, we need to look at things differently. Some kind of an out-of-box thinking may also be required. Now, if you look at the present Indian situation, what you find here is that the worst is clearly behind us, and India is on a high growth trajectory. There are, however, heightened geopolitical dynamics in the wake of the Russia-Ukraine war, the high fuel prices, high logistics and interest cost, volatile capital flows, exchange rate volatility, and the scramble for safe haven. At the domestic level, there are concerns of high inflation, unmistakably high fiscal deficit, high unemployment, and the risk of a recession in several countries. Despite all these overarching elements of the Indian macroeconomic scene, India has emerged as a bright spot in the global economy, and India's growth seems here to stay. India will be the second fastest growing economy in G20 after Saudi Arabia, and I think Charan and all these Bhanumurthy also highlighted. Now, basically, while India has is growing at a relatively quite fast pace, but there are 2-3 elements which I wish to highlight, sometimes lost in this kind of debates and discussion. One is that while India is growing at possibly 6.5, 6.2%, global economy is growing at 2%. So one thing is that we are outpacing the global growth economy. But when you do some kind of a disaggregated examination, when you look at the granular data, you find some kind of a sectoral skew in the sense that the growth is led by BFSI sector, banking, financial services, insurance, automobiles, and telecom. So I don't have time to go into this kind of a sectoral skew, but this is also one thing which you must keep in mind. Another thing which I like to highlight, I think Charan and Bhanumurthy both mentioned, that India has become the fifth largest global economy. We pushed Great Britain to sixth. Now all that is welcome. But in economics, finance, banking, we say the devil lies in the detail. So if you do some kind of a more detailed examination, what you find here is that despite UK being displaced to a lower notch, sixth notch, and if we look at the data, there are several benchmarks. One important benchmark, obviously, that has its own deficiencies world over because it provides some measure of uniformity, consistency, is the per capita income. So if you look at the position, for example, number 5 and 6 in per capita terms, maybe India's per capita in US dollar terms would be $1,500. UK still would be something like $4,400. So we have a lot of catching up to do. What you call in economics, finance, banking is the base effect also comes into play. So I'll also like to highlight elements of sectoral skew, elements of the base effect. However, on taking things on a medium-term perspective, I don't say long-term, because as John Maynard Keynes said sometime in 1930, in the long run, we are all dead. So we prefer to use the term medium term. So there are the issues of persisting demographic dividend, services exports, domestic demand potential, rising middle class. All these make India an attractive destination. There has also been a significant trust on the fiscal sector, infrastructure, renewed trust on exports, investments. So on the whole, I think the Indian growth story is here to stay. Some of the trust areas mentioned by both of the distinguished speakers, 7 trust areas. So basically, we are looking at providing some kind of impetus, some kind of an accent on the development process and pattern of the Indian economy, with while containing, while restricting to a prudent fiscal deficit norms. Now, why do we contain fiscal deficit? Just like to use one sentence of former finance secretary, he said it about, I think, 15-20 years back, Shankar Acharya, but still very relevant, because in one sentence he captures the essence of fiscal deficit when he said that such deficits, fiscal deficits, tend to crowd out private investment, increase inflationary potential, weaken the balance of payments, render financial sector reforms more difficult, and impose a serious burden on future generations. Now, both Charan and Bhanumurthy referred to the FRBM Act, Fiscal Responsibility Budget, which goes back to about 2003 encasing committee, but thankfully we seem to be on the right track. And one of the important elements, one of the important strands of the present day development strategy is the buoyant collection in the tax revenues, direct taxes, income tax, and other direct taxes were estimated to come in for the full year ending March 23 at about 12.5 lakh crore. Present estimates suggest that will cross 14 lakh crores. In case of goods and services tax, if we look at the monthly numbers, then some month they have gone to 160, 170, other months 130. But broadly, consistently for the last several months, they have been in a region of 1,48,000, 1,50,000, 52. So broadly 150 into 12, we are looking at GST collection, something of the order of 18 lakh. So we are likely to end this financial year with a tax collection of something like 31.5, 32 lakh crore, as against the estimates of 27.5 lakh crores, which places India in a very advantageous, in a good position. In case of this tax collection, I think I'd like to just mention one thing, since this was not mentioned, highlighted by the 2 previous speakers, that I don't wish to make any political point, but if you look at the earlier government, there was a tendency, especially towards the ends of the last government, last few years, that there was a very heavy element of what we call in economics and budgeting in a sense as off-balance sheet items, especially in case of oil bonds. So in a very welcome indication, last few years, the FM has not resorted to any off-budget, and so these fiscal deficit numbers appear far more transparent, appear far more credible. Now, gross market borrowing estimated at rupees 15.43 lakh crore. So I think Bhanumurthy dealt with some detail. So I will skip those aspects, but I'll just restrict myself to saying that the perceived fiscal consolidation in an uncertain global environment will require more efforts. Upcoming elections, thrust on capex are welcome indications. There was some concerns that the finance minister may be tempted to what is called playing to the gallery because of political campaign issues, but then there has been a clear thrust on the fiscal glide path and a lower subsidy bill, especially in case of fertilizers, also some other Narega and other things. Another aspect, again, since this was not highlighted by the other speakers, is disinvestment. Disinvestment target is quite realistic this year, I think 60,000. So I think with the Indian economy going traction, last year there was one big ticket disinvestment of the Air India. LIC was planned, but because of various things. So this was all, the government was subjected to a lot of criticism, but my submission is the government did the right, adopted the right strategy by shifting the LIC disinvestment to a later date, because this is something like using your family jewels. So you have to wait for the maybe just because if I'm representing the government, I have given some projection that I will disinvest these companies, but if the pricing is not right, it's all about the pricing. So you are selling the family jewelers kind of a thing. So I think if the pricing is right, we could go in for some greater disinvestment. MSMEs again is a focus area. There have been a large number of measures. And this is most significant because 95% of all industrial units, 40% of exports, 40% of manufacturing come from the MSME sector, and it's the largest provider of employment next only to Indian agriculture. So there have been a large number of measures to MSMEs. So all this is very welcome. In terms of infrastructure, capex, 33% growth to 10 lakh. I think all of the previous speakers referred to that. Now, let me briefly refer to agriculture sector, which has not received its due. When you look at the agriculture sector in India, there is basically some kind of an asymmetric process of growth and development. Because if you place things in a proper perspective, what you find is that in 1950, agriculture accounted for 50% of GDP. Pre-COVID, this proportion fell to 16%. Post-COVID, because services and manufacturing took a hit, again, this has shown some rise, but still at about 19-20%. Obviously, services sector is the far more dominant sector, coming in at about 60% or so. But still, despite agriculture accounting for only about 20%, it still accounts for about 56-58% of people employed in agriculture. Whether they are employed in agriculture or underemployed, that is a separate debate that itself will take a full session. So I think we don't have time to go in. But in this kind of thing, a lot of references were made by Charan and Bhanumurthy to efficiency, to productivity. So I think there are some welcome measures, setting up of digital public infrastructure for agriculture, agriculture accelerator fund, thrust on millets cultivation. All this is welcome. Now, again, let me come to one aspect which I think was skipped by both the speakers. They left it perhaps for me because I worked for long in the commercial banking sector. So let me take a minute or two to refer to some important changes in the banking sector. The FM has proposed amendments to the Banking Regulation Act 1949 and the RBI Act 1934 to improve the functioning of banks. And now remarkable improvement in the profits of banks and asset quality of banks is taken. I have not looked at the complete data, but it is expected that this year profits from all banks could reach something like 70,000-80,000 crore, which is a huge, humongous figure. GNP's gross net performing assets have reduced to a 7-year low of 5%. Going ahead, I think if you look at one of the most comprehensive works in this sector called the RBI's FSR, Financial Stability Report, which is brought out twice a year on a biannual basis, sometime in January and July, they have made that if there are some other risk factors not materializing, maybe these GNPAs could fall to something like 4% going ahead. Bank loan disbursement has been growing at about a very fast clip, maybe at about 13% or so. But this loan growth, as I think Bhanumurthy briefly mentioned, this has outpaced the growth in deposits. So this has caused some stress on the banking development. Now, if you do some kind of analysis that we are seeing very heavy, faster growth in credit, about 14-15%. So where is it coming from? So I looked at the data, and what the data suggests, there has been a pickup in basically small loans and housing loans. If you look at the bank's balance sheet, bank's asset side, obviously loans advances, the most important segment, and loans advances across banks, they are basically four sectors, four broad sectors: agriculture and allied activities, MSME, retail lending, and large industrial loans. Retail lending has been adopted by the go-to sector, by the high growth, where the possibilities of defaults and delinquencies are much lower. So if you do some kind of a drill down analysis on the retail sector in case of commercial banking in India, what you find is that this has also broadly four components. One is housing loan, the other is vehicle loan, third is education loan, fourth is other personal loans. But because of the huge amounts involved, whether you look at the banking industry or whether you look at the position of individual banks like SBI, ICICI, PNB, Canara Bank, other banks, what you find is that housing loan roughly accounts for about 50% of the total retail lending portfolio. And if you look at the retail lending portfolio, that roughly accounts for about 24% of the loans and advances of all banks. So this is again a very welcome thing, but there are some concerns of rising NPAs here also. Now, as I think Bhanumurthy and Charan pointed out, that the FM has been quite conservative given the 6.5% GDP growth, 4.5% inflation, the growth in tax revenues. They will continue to outstrip the growth in GDP by a large margin. And energy sector, green economics, green financing all over the world. I think these kind of things have been there for the last 40-50 years. Going back to early 1970s, the Club of Rome approach, United Nations brought out a very complex, but in the last few years, the issues of sustainable development, which basically means promoting development in a manner without compromising the interests of future generations, environmental pollution, climate change. So all these issues are interrelated, sustainable, and we have recently seen in North India the sinking of this Joshimath, very important center of religious tourism, other things. This could also, so this is an subject clearly whose time has come, and I'm happy to find that the FM has provided a very welcome thrust on a large number of issues of the energy sector impacting on the green energy. Now let me come to my concluding observations. given the devastating hit to the Indian economy by the COVID-19 pandemic and growth now gaining traction, the accent has to be on increasing investment, creating externalities towards improving economic environment and enhancing productivity for sustained growth. In the ultimate analysis, the Indian economy needs a sharper focus on all four engines of growth. Whether you look at things in a short-term perspective of this year or take a fairly medium-term perspective, basically what you find in India is there are basically four engines of growth: domestic consumption, government expenditure, private investment, and exports. So all these issues need coordinated and concerted action with a sense of urgency. And I'm happy to share with you that despite the manifold constraints under which the finance minister of the country had worked, coming out of the COVID, pressure on the fiscal deficit, need to meet competing priorities. So I think she seems to have done a good job of it. In sum, given the manifold global and domestic headwinds, the budget adopted a broad-based development strategy with a renewed thrust on economic development and inclusive growth. But however, to my mind, there could have been a greater accent on health and education. These are two things. Now, let me just try to explain that if you look at things traditionally, what has happened in case of India, other emerging markets, is that the concept of population being a drag has always been considered till about 20 years back to be a drag on economic growth. This has a long-standing tradition going back to the essay on population written by British economist Thomas Malthus in 1798. Now, since 1798 to October 2002, this kind of a mindset held sway. But for the first time, there was a paradigm shift. There was some kind of a real breaking the ground, some kind of a seminar paper by two persons of Goldman Sachs, one American gentleman, professor called Dominic Wilson, the other was an Indian lady called Rupa Purushottam. And the first time they demonstrated in a telling manner that the fact that, for example, if you look at the present Indian population, about 50% is below the age of 35. So they demonstrated, and since then it has become the convention. If you do a Google hit or breaks, demographic dividend, things like that, maybe you could get a few crore entries. So they demonstrated that this needs to be looked at positively. This, by working in this age group, where they can contribute to factories, they can contribute to the production and process of the Indian economy. This would be a strong catalyst to driving Indian growth. And they said that by 2040, 2045, India could become the largest economy all over the world, riding on the advantages of this demographic dividend. But here, as Indians, I think sometimes we have a tendency to gloss over certain things. So towards the end of the report, Dominic Wilson and Rupa Purushottam of Goldman Sachs identified certain risk factors. And these risk factors were health, education, and employment. I have been writing on this for some time. I wrote a paper, I think, for Times of India about 10, 15 years back, where I said that unless these concerns of health, education, and employment are addressed and addressed effectively, India's so-called demographic dividend may well turn out to be a demographic disaster. So I think I gave this special address in Hubli, Dharwad, Twin Cities, Karnataka. So it was picked up by the Times of India that there are areas of concern. So I have always held the point that if India is to grow fast, if India is to emerge as a global growth driver, it is already so. But if we are to consolidate this kind of a process, issues of health, education, and employment need to be given a sharper focus. Within the constraints, I think FM has done some work, but much more could have been done. I think I will stop here because I was asked to stop at 12:30. In case there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you very much for having me with you here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for sharing your insights. I will reserve my questions towards the end. Now, from among our audience in the panel who joined as panelists, if there are any questions, please put up your hand or you could unmute and speak. Akshay, go ahead.
Yeah, so I had a question related to the green economy that the government is actually willing to adapt. So obviously, government is also emphasizing on MSMEs to grow, but they also want to go along with the green path itself. But the sustainable energy or any kind of a resource that hasn't reached the economy of scale to be any cheaper for MSMEs. I believe, if you go to MSMEs, they usually go to traditional energy, consumption because they are cheaper. If you go to a sustainable energy, option, they are usually more expensive. So government has been emphasizing on that, but obviously MSMEs will take time to traditionally move to these, these systems, new systems. But as I mentioned, that government has been emphasizing, but this transition won't happen that I would expect that to happen like very smooth or probably in very few very next years itself. What are your views in exactly how the MSMEs should adapt to it? Because I don't seem to be having much much progress in that that matter. I haven't seen this last few years.
Okay, 2-3 parts to my answer. One is at the global level also. Recently, I think in maybe 2-3 months back, there was a very famous conference held at Glasgow called COP26. So at the macro level also, these kind of countries like India, China, other have effectively raised the issue that there has to be a hefty transfer of funds. Because what you are looking at globally is, and when you look at UK, Britain, France, all these so-called, they are looking at the extent of pollution, that you are emitting so many polluting elements in the air and without any exemptions. Now, we in India have effectively articulated the point that this is not something that you went to, today is what, 9th January, that till 8th January, everything was hunky-dory. And when you get up on, let us say, get up from the bed on 9th January, you find that we are heavily polluting the environment with damaging consequences on lives, livelihoods, so many other things. So this has been a part of a historical cumulative process going back to the Industrial Revolution last 200 to 50 years. India or even China for that matter did not adequately grow. So to the extent, if you look at our historical emissions, not just the emissions of today, we need to be compensated. At the global level, India has taken over the presidency of G20. Again, this has emerged as one of the major issues of contention. We ran into rough weather at the global level. Now, gradually, I'm happy to say that from the data analysis which emerges, I think most countries are coming down to that this kind of an exception should also be made to countries like emerging India, China, who have not been a large, huge, humongous historical polluters, so to say. So again, similar kind of mindset appears for this kind of MSME, because ultimately, if you are an MSME producer, entrepreneur, you are looking at your bottom line, you are looking at your profits and profitability. You are, for example, if I can give you an example from Delhi, Punjab, Haryana, UP, similar to MSME, mainly in agriculture, there's a lot of around Diwali time, major issues crops up in all newspapers, all television channels, all over the country, but especially in North India, about this parali, this waste which is left in the fields, because it's not viable for the producer to get them removed, so they burn it. It causes some kind of that pollution. So now there have been some kind of a rethink on that. Maybe subsidy all over the world, even in India, has become a bad word. So we don't use the word subsidy. So we prefer to use a term called incentivization. So maybe the farmers could be incentivized to, so that if this could be, and now I think last 2 months, some studies have come. So these are early days. These are some kind of a pilot study that if these things are cut properly, they could work as some kind of a energy generator. So obviously, these are complex issues. These are issues of considerable interdependence and interlinkages. So there are certainly no easy answers to all this, but there has been a greater increased consciousness, heightened awareness of these issues. For example, a lot of MSMEs in India are increasingly considering the earlier it was said that waste management does not give you any money. You are just throwing good money after bad. So, but now even there have been a lot of very good work. Right now, it's only a demonstration pilot study that MSMEs could be involved in waste management, and it could become a huge source of energy generation. So all these things will take time, but I'm happy to say that things are moving in the right direction. There has been an increased consciousness across the development spectrum, and gradually, I think we will take the right steps.
Thank you, sir, for the answer.
Okay, perhaps last question from the audience by Dushyant.
Yes, thank you, sir. Sir, I want to ask, like, the budget for the Minority Ministry Affair, Ministry of Minority Affairs has reduced by significant percentage, like 38% down. So, sir, what are your thoughts that what the government is thinking right now of the social welfare propagandas?
Well, 2-3 aspects again to the issue which I have not seen such detail, but I will take your figures as correct. The allocation for this might have reduced. But I think as Charan Bhanumurthy, or perhaps you missed one point when they said that, and this has been not just of this government, it goes back to last 5-6 successive finance minister in terms of the union government. This kind of a mindset has goes back. First time, I think Chidambaram or someone used this term, moving from outlay to outcome. So what kind of an impact this has? So maybe this outlay is one part of the story. Another part of the story is that how effectively, how efficiently if we are using. Another issue which I'd like to highlight in case of minorities is that in terms of priority sector lending, all banks are required to achieve 40% priority sector lending. And then what you find here is that 18% to direct agriculture, some MSME, 5% has to go to women and minorities. So I was part of Canada Bank for about 18-20 years. What we found is that we have always overshot this so-called target by a wide margin. I left Canada Bank about 2-3 years back, so I'm not aware of the latest data, but till about 2 years back, I think Canada Bank, and same would apply for PNB of State Bank of India. At least we were achieving 8% of our loan or 10% of our loans advances were going to the priorities minorities group, which was otherwise mandated in case of by the Reserve Bank of India and government. So there are multiple aspects. Outlay is one aspect. I think made a presentation at a national conference of minorities, development government of minorities in Delhi about 6-8 months back, and this evoked a very welcome response, not just in India, across the world, because minorities are an important segment of the population which you cannot be oblivious to in any part of the country. So subsequently I developed some of those thoughts in a paper, and if you can share your WhatsApp or email ID with me later, you have the organizers. So I'll share that paper with you. So across the world, I have suggested some ways how to bring about greater emancipation, greater participation, greater engagement. So finance is one part of the whole story, but there are also other parts, such as how do we use those funds, how effectively, how efficiently, whether it is widely dispersed, whether it is going to the right channels, or whether there are regional and sectoral imbalances, and how effective. So all this is again a very complex issue. And as I said earlier, there are again no easy answers, but then all of us are focused on this kind of on the Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas. This has been the government motto also, that if India is to grow and achieve its place in the sun, consolidate its economic muscle and clout, the needs of the minorities have to be effectively addressed. And I think maybe that's a full-length paper running into about maybe 15, 14 printed pages. If you could share your WhatsApp or email, I'd be happy to mail that paper to you. Thank you.
So, yeah, any more questions from the audience? Okay, so sir, so my so I'll have a couple of questions to you because you have been the chief economist of Canara Bank earlier. Now,
I'll request you to stop at 12:50 because I have to go for another program at 1 o'clock.
Right, sir. So my only question is, so you've mentioned that the credit growth is being outpaced by the deposit growth. So which means
credit growth is much faster than the deposit growth. Yes.
Yes, it has outpaced deposit growth. So do we see that it is likely that the stricter interest rate regime is likely to continue because of lack of liquidity in the system? Interest rates are likely to be high. So despite that, do we foresee that the economy will do well in real terms, growing at 6%, or is the 6% estimate a little on the higher side? How do you see this issue, sir?
Okay, you have linked two issues, GDP growth and the banking sector. So yes, we see 6% growth is here to stay. Second part, banking sector. So banking, what the issue has been highlighted is that there has been faster growth in the rate of interest on loans, but there has also been some impressive gain in terms of interest on deposit, which are relied by pensioners, fixed income group, teachers, other places. Obviously, this has not been commensurate with the rise in the rate of interest on loans. For sometimes banks can address a mismatch by going to the RBI window. There are also some other things like banks, most banks, whether you look at Canara, SBI, PNB, ICICI, some of the bigger have come out with a so-called attractive deposit for 5. They've come up with catchy names, special deposit for 555 days, where you get a little higher rate of interest, but your funds get locked up. So obviously this is an evolving situation, and I'm sure banks will find other ways to fund credit growth. That is going to be a little difficult, but I'm sure banks have always displayed immense dynamism and resilience. So now, at certain stage, credit does not take off. At certain stage, deposits does not grow in the desired fashion. Both these things are interlinked. Deposits and advances are both important parts of the growth of banking sector, because this is the basic purpose of banks. If you look at the Banking Regulation Act 1949, how does it define a banking entity? It defines a banking entity as accepting deposits for the purpose of lending. So these are the two basic mool mantras. Success, you have to mobilize deposits, you have to use it in lending, and if you're not able to use it, you have to deploy it in your treasury functions, GSECs and other avenues. But historically, these are the two traditional. So I think all banks are consciously working. Again, you looked at the big picture, but across, if you do some kind of a granular analysis, what you find is that this deposits in case of all banks is broken up into various components. Deposits of varying maturities, less than 180 days, less than 365 days, 700 days, more than 3 years. So each bank risk management department, they do a very detailed analysis, and they find that where is their liability mismatch the most happening or likely to occur. So to attract depositors, what they do is, for example, if I am, let us say, from Canara Bank, I find that my mismatch is more in 365 days. In other places I will offer FDs, term deposits, or maybe let us say 8%. Especially to target these kind of depositors, I will offer 8.5% or 8.75%, depending on my needs and requirements. And these kind of strategies have worked well in the past. I see no reason to see why this kind of thing should not work. So it is a difficult task, but all of us are used to doing difficult tasks and do them well. As students at IIM, you have a difficult course for students, but then obviously this is the test. This is the mark mark of a successful person, successful institution. You overcome all these travails of transition, and I'm sure banks will emerge much stronger in the days and years going ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, sir, for your time. We have overshot by about 15 minutes. We apologize for that. But let me quickly invite Professor Tamali to present a small memento, a token of our appreciation for your time and insights. The entire faculty body, including our director, joins us to wish you, to thank you. Here is a small memento. We'll make arrangements to send it towards you. I'll now we'll be in touch with you to get this delivered. I now invite Professor Asmita to quickly make a comment and then we'll close the session formally. Thank you.
Okay, I'll not take much of anybody's time. I just want to say that on behalf of IIM Visakhapatnam, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to our panelists, Professor Bhanumurthy, Dr. Sharma, and Professor Singh, for enlightening us with their thoughts on the union budget. Sir, we have had a lot of takeaways today and definitely something to think on for the future. I would also like to thank our director, Professor Chandrasekhar, for his wholehearted encouragement and support, and without whose encouragement this program would not have been possible. Coordinator Academics and Research, Professor Shiv Shankar, for gracing us with his presence. Our area colleagues and other faculty who have joined us today for this program. I would also like to thank our IT support services, the administrative department, and last but not the least, all the participants, staff, and students who agreed to be a part of this program and being with us here today. Thank you one and all.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. We can close this now. Thank you for your time. We'll be in touch. Thank you, everyone, again for joining. Now we can conclude the session. You're really welcome to send any questions to us. We'll try and see if we can address them ourselves or to the panelists a little bit later. Have a happy rest of your weekend. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.